Imagine two groups of people competing for the same job, the last slice of pizza, or even a promotion. As tension rises and frustration builds, things can get ugly quickly. Accusations start flying, and before long, there's hostility between the groups. But what if it's not just about the competition? What if it's about the very way groups form, and how competition for limited resources shapes the way we treat one another? Today I am going to talk about how competition for scarce resources can lead to conflict, prejudice, and how shared goals can bring us together. In this video, I will talk about realistic conflict theory. This was presented using an experiment conducted by Sheriff and others, which explains how competition for resources leads to prejudice and discrimination, called the Robber's Cave experiment. Realistic conflict theory suggests that conflict arises when groups compete for scarce resources. This could be jobs, land, or even social recognition. When resources are limited, groups often view each other as rivals. Researchers took 22 12-year-old boys from middle-class families and randomly split them into two groups. They didn't know each other and were placed in a summer camp at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. For the first week, the two groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers, and they did not know about each other's existence. The boys were encouraged to bond within their own groups, creating their own group names, norms, and identity. It was all about developing group cohesion. But then, the researchers introduced the competition stage. The two groups were pitted against each other in various competitive activities, such as baseball, tug-of-war, and other challenges. There were trophies and prizes for the winners, and no consolation for the losers. The Rattlers were so confident of their victory that they even made threats against the Eagles if they interfered with their territory. Soon, the groups were openly hostile. The Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag, and the Rattlers ransacked the Eagles' cabin. The boys began to express prejudice and discrimination, seeing their own group in a favorable light while demonizing the other group. The researchers didn't just let the hostility build, but they introduced shared goals that can only be achieved by cooperation between the two groups. For example, they created situations where both groups had to work together to solve a problem, such as collecting enough firewood to complete a task or repairing a water supply. These goals were too big for either group to achieve alone. The hostility between the groups dropped significantly. Working together to achieve something bigger than their individual goals helped them see the value of cooperation, and they began to interact more peacefully. Whilst there was still awareness of their differences, and they still had a hint of hatred for each other, the relations were still better. The Robbers Cave experiment mimics a lot of the conflict we see in the world. Social media can amplify this conflict. Online, groups can form quickly, and before long, we're labeling others as the enemy over political, economic, or social issues. But what if we started looking for goals big enough to require cooperation from all sides? What if, instead of focusing on what divides us, we found shared objectives that could help bring groups together? Realistic conflict theory tells us that competition for scarce resources fuels hostility, but by identifying shared goals, we can encourage cooperation and reduce prejudice. From a psychological standpoint, communication and collaboration are key to breaking down barriers between groups. Further, if we recognize that everyone's well-being is intertwined, we can work together for the common good. Whether it's in the workplace, the classroom, or even in society at large, emphasizing common ground and promoting joint efforts can help ease tensions and foster positive relationships.